But again, our thanks to the Center for National Policy. As Scott mentioned, this is our second event that we're doing together, and it's hopefully the first of many more to come. Also, a great thanks to Northrop Grumman, our sponsor, who really makes this event possible and intelligent conversations move forward. Scott mentioned our speakers. We're delighted to have Michael Daniel, Jeff Moss, Peter Singer, and Frank Salufo. They're going to be part of a panel discussion that I think is going to be quite remarkable and informative. A little bit of promotion. The Monitor has a big announcement today. We are pleased to announce the debut of a new CSM initiative called Passcode. That we call it the Modern Field Guide to Security and Privacy. It relies on a global network of Monitor reporters from around the world, led by Mike Farrell, our editor, and our deputy editor, Sarah Sorsher. Both of them are here today, and they'd be happy to talk to you more about the Monitor's new initiative. We intend to provide deeply reported, solution-oriented, non-fear-mongering coverage that moves your understanding and the discussion forward. Again, you can find us at csmpasscode.com. Now, this is the debut, so stay tuned between now and January when we do our formal launch. So we're here today to talk about cybersecurity, an important topic, one that the Monitor is obviously investing resources in. And why is that? Well, primarily, it's a big story. It's a big, complex story that touches a lot of lives. More people than ever impacted and concerned about both privacy and digital security. Much of the discussion, oftentimes, to a degree, focuses on fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And so what are the Monitor values that we're trying to bring to this coverage and discussion? Well, 107 years of journalism that is deeply reported and global. And we'll admit to our biases. We're constructive, progress-minded, and solution-oriented. These days, all media companies have to decide where to invest and what to cover most particularly. And one of the areas we're investing in is cybersecurity. Passcode is how we're doing it. And so remember, csmpasscode.com. It's now my pleasure to introduce Vern Boyle. And one of his colleagues just gave me a quick little headline on Vern, describing him as the rare breed that is a deep technologist that can speak English. I immediately tried to hire him. Vern is director of technology for Northrop Grumman's cyber division, and his team leads an advanced cyber technology team responsible for understanding emerging problems and solving those problems in advance for customers worldwide. Vern will introduce a vision for a new paradigm for cybersecurity thinking with the goal of making our systems more resilient. After Vern finishes, we'll take some Q&A. And with that, Vern, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for having me. So I'm here today to start a new conversation, a conversation about looking at cybersecurity a little bit differently with the goal of making our systems more resilient. My hope is that this conversation can move us past the age of the high-profile breach. Many of the breaches are very well known. They're very personal, like the Home Depot breach, the Target breach. This week, the J.P. Morgan Chase breach was in the news front and center. These are very personal to us because they're criminal in nature, and the idea of money coming out of our wallets is a scary thing. But there are also other high-profile breaches that in some ways are even more disturbing, but aren't always as well known. So you have the Shamoon attack on Saudi Aramco some time ago. This was an attack on a national critical infrastructure provider. And you have the issue with the French and British Navy back in 2009 with the Conficker virus. And these attacks were aimed at disabling those organizations' ability to conduct their primary mission. And you can imagine the military unable to perform its mission as a result of a computer virus. This is a very real potential problem. And then you have the insider threat. We're all familiar with the Snowden case. And you have the cyber vigilantes like Anonymous, conducting espionage, disrupting systems for a wide variety of purposes. So this is a global, borderless problem, and it's not going away anytime soon. So the real question is, why is it so easy for the attacker and seemingly so hard for the defender? How is it that they seem to march in and out of these systems as if nobody's watching? And you'll get a lot of different opinions on that. People spend their careers trying to figure that out. But when you blow away all the smoke, I think it comes down really to two root problems. The first is that the cyber systems that we rely on are inherently vulnerable. So the commercial operating systems, the commercial software packages, the commercial hardware platforms, these are all designed primarily to address profit motives. They're easily obtained by the attacker. They can exploit and find the vulnerabilities in those systems, and that's largely what they take advantage of. That's probably not going to change anytime soon. And then the second problem is that you have machines against people in a high-speed battle. And now what do I mean by that? Well, you have hundreds of thousands of malware samples being generated every month. So that's not people writing that malware. Those are machines. And those are machines automatically circumventing all of our defensive systems. That malware typically operates inside of an infrastructure that is also automatically controlled by machines. So the command and control nodes, the hop points, the channels that connect these different adversary systems together are typically set up, used one time or for a very limited period of time, and then they're torn down and they're never seen again. Now let's contrast that with the way we defend our systems. So we have fixed infrastructures, monitored by thousands of people, climbing up mountains of data, trying to sort through what's happening, patching software, writing signatures, reacting and chasing, and trying to find this machine-driven, fast-moving target. So you have a static, human-controlled system battling with an automated, machine-driven system. And at the end of the day, the machines are going to win that battle every time. It doesn't matter how many people you try to put up against those machines. And so how do we fix that? How do we overcome that? How do we develop a protective strategy that makes the systems inherently resilient? One way that I'd like to introduce into this conversation is by making our cyber systems disposable. And I don't mean disposable in the sense that you throw them away like a paper cup. I'm talking about disposable in the sense that they are single use. Because if you think about it, that is exactly what the adversary is doing. Their malware, their command and control, their channels, single use. And we can do the very same thing with our own cyber systems. This would make it far more difficult for an adversary to gain access and persist into the system if what they saw on Tuesday was no longer there on Wednesday and it was different yet again on Thursday. So this would shift the battle from us chasing them to them chasing us. And that would move the advantage in favor of the defender. There are 6 technologies that make this concept possible. You're going to recognize them because they're already out there, and they're in varying degrees of maturity. So 3 of them are sort of the biggies, and then there's three smaller enablers underneath that. So the first is the cloud computing paradigm. So this is a technology that is designed to be flexible, reconfigurable. You can establish compute and storage devices anywhere, anytime. It's essentially a disposable technology. The second big pillar is software-defined networking. Think of this as cloud for communications. So again, rather than a static communication channel, software-defined networking allows you to do ad hoc networking, allows unconventional devices to behave as routers, and really provides a lot more of that sort of flexible, reconfigurable, disposable capability. And the third big pillar are these increasingly mobile endpoints. And while many people think that the mobile endpoints are more vulnerable, when you look at the security architecture, it's actually moving in the direction of being more secure. And again, it enables a very flexible, reconfigurable, disposable approach. When you bring those three pieces together, the software-defined networking, the cloud, and the increasingly mobile endpoint, you have the opportunity to create an entirely disposable system. So rather than fixed static gateways, static routes, static endpoints that never move, we would have virtualized moving gateways, ad hoc networks, and single-use private endpoints. This system would be controlled by our network defenders. So rather than spending their time reacting and chasing and climbing up that mountain of data, they would spend their time proactively reconfiguring these systems so that they are very hard to understand and breach. Underneath of those three big building blocks, there are three other critical enablers. They are root of trust, identity, and always-on encryption. Part of the disposable concept of operations is to configure, operate, dispose, and restore. That restoration piece comes from the root of trust. Identity is a very important thing within this paradigm. Being able to understand the identity of the machines and the people and permitting them into the system, permitting them the access to information based on their identity and their role is a key to keeping unauthorized people out of the system. And the always-on encryption is a no-brainer. Right? You don't open the door and let somebody come in and walk all over your network. Right? You need to lock down zones and lock down different information based on always-on encryption. So when those six technologies are brought together, again, it creates the opportunity for us to enable a disposable system concept of operations. Let me talk about a couple of scenarios of how that might be used to kind of illustrate the application of this system. So the first one I'd like to talk about is an operations center scenario, more of a strategic network. So imagine operators coming in to perform their job, and rather than carrying their device with them or finding the device on their desk, they walk into the building and they pull it off of a rack or out of a bin. That device would have been established to a known good state by a team of people, network defenders that know how to do that from the root of trust. When he turns the machine on, it has an identity, it turns on the encrypted channel. That machine authenticates itself into a central system. The operator then uses his fingerprint, his voice print, his CAC card to authenticate himself into the system, and his personal configuration is loaded onto this device. When he walks into the operations floor, his other analyst friends are there with him, and they form up a private ad hoc network among the team, fully encrypted. Only the people permitted to participate in that mission are allowed inside. Those people can be outside the building. They can be around the world. They can be anywhere. So those operators can function throughout the day within this private, trusted environment. And at the end of their shift, they turn the machine off, they toss it back in the bin, and they leave. That machine is then wiped clean. It's given a new identity. And the next shift of operators can come in and do the same thing. So that system is essentially disposed of. It's never used again. The routes, the nodes, the identities, if somebody were able to see and understand it when they came in the next day, it wouldn't be there anymore. Now let's take that into a more tactical environment, because tablets and laptops are not the only kind of endpoints that we need to be concerned about. We need to think about unmanned vehicles, UAVs. We need to think about sensors on UAVs. We need to think about fire control systems. All of these can function within the same disposable concept of operations. So imagine, if you will, a special forces team has been asked to go perform a rescue mission. They need to have overhead surveillance to help them out, and we're going to use some UAVs for that support. So once again, the UAVs should not be sitting there with untrusted software on them, with untrusted operating systems. They should be loaded for that specific mission at the time of the mission from a strong root of trust. The people flying the UAVs and controlling them should have their identity authenticated into that system so that they can move the UAVs over to the area of interest. And then the ground forces will have some device that is also built from a strong root of trust so that they can receive the real-time video they need to conduct their mission. And in the end, all of those systems will come back, they'll get wiped clean, they'll be given new identities, and once again, that system is essentially disposed of, never used again. So this is a concept that would be very frustrating to an adversary. Imagine them spending their time mapping, trying to find holes. Maybe they actually identified some, but the next time they come back to take advantage of that, that system's no longer there. So how do we get there? How do we move from the react and chase model to this proactive, disposable concept of operations? Well, one thing you don't do is take the current security architecture and implement it onto this flexible, reconfigurable infrastructure. So for example, you wouldn't want to take today's monitoring applications, virtualize them, and put them into the cloud, because all you're really doing is implementing the same paradigm, and you're going to still be reacting and chasing. What we need to do is take those 6 key building blocks. We need to bring them together. We need to accelerate the integration of those 6 technologies, and then we need to build that proactive model for security. This will make it far more difficult for the adversary to gain access and persist. If there is an insider threat, it will make it far more difficult for him to reach out and grab information he's not permitted to have. So if we want our systems to be more resilient in the future, we need to think about making them disposable. Thank you. And I guess we'll take some questions now.
Right. Thank you very much. So I've been given the opportunity to ask the lead-off question, and I'm going to seize that opportunity. So first of all, Vern, I love this, this image that you present of moving the momentum from the attacker to the defender. And it's very helpful to look at the 3 core and 3 supporting technologies that could create a disposable system. Within those 3, is there an area that your team is thinking most about, and or a next step in this integration that would move us forward in creating these disposable systems, i.e., where should we focus next?
Well, we're researching each of those technologies, and some of the customers are also researching each of those technologies. I think where we need to go next is in the direction of bringing those 6 pieces together and really figuring out how to implement that disposable command and control, that disposable security model to wrap around the 6 key technologies. But we're already working on the individual pieces.
Excellent. Great. Let's ask some questions from the floor. And I think, is there a mic that gentleman here on my right?
Hi, thank you so much. This is very informative and interesting. My name is Guy Taylor. I'm the National Security Team Leader at the Washington Times. And I have a question about, you were touted as someone who speaks English or common man language about this. So what, let's say this hypothetical UAV mission that you're talking about involves recording some video. Where would that video then be stored once these systems are wiped? And would that system on which that video is stored be something that gets recycled constantly? It sounds like an inconceivable amount of data that would have to be wiped and moved all the time.
Yes, good question. So we're actually not talking about disposing of mission data. You know, the recorded video would potentially be temporarily stored on board or moved into a back-end cloud infrastructure. And what we're talking about wiping and restoring are the infrastructure pieces of the system. So the processors and the operating systems and the software that collects the video is what would be wiped clean and restored. The mission data would be preserved and put into the cloud and moved and changed as part of this kind of moving target disposable model.
Thank you. In the back, and could you state your name and affiliation, please, when you take the mic?
Hi. Hi, Brian Pendleton, private security consultant. My question is, what about cost and risk analysis? You talked about having multiple sets of laptops, infrastructure. Businesses have a huge cost there, so how are you going to get them to buy into this?
Right. So that's a good question. And I've been asked that before. What is the cost of something like this? And I think you want to look at this from a life cycle cost perspective of a breach. What does it cost when an organization, whether it be a military organization or a financial organization, experiences a breach? What does that cost? The second dimension of cost is the man hours. How much time, how much money are we spending chasing, reacting, searching for things that are no longer there? We want to shift that to a more efficient use of those man hours. So those are really the two biggest variables in the cost equation. Cost of the breach and the cost of the people. And I think if you move the needle on those, you're going to wind up coming out ahead.
We have time for one last question. That was fast. Yes, gentleman in the black shirt here.
Yes, Hamed Behravan with Voice of America. In terms of the rapid response that you mentioned that is going to shift and you're going to have disposable responses, is that country specific? For example, we know Iran, China, and Russia use different tactics. Do you also analyze what kind of methods they use so the response that you give would be specific to those countries?
I think one of the advantages of a proactive security model is that it's somewhat agnostic to the attacker. Right. So our goal is not to try to analyze, react, and chase what the adversary is doing. Our goal is to take control of our own systems and proactively configure them so that they're very hard to gain access to. So independent of who's attempting to gain access, whether it's a criminal, a cyber vigilante, a nation state, we want to take control of our systems. That's what the proactive security model is all about.
Vern, thank you so much. I mean, it's fascinating to hear of a potential more agile response to defending cyber attacks, and we appreciate your thoughts immensely today. Thank you.
Thank
Quick
you.
round of applause.